Dr. Aliriza, you are an expert on Turkish politics, but what about Turkish role this time in persuading parties to come together? Are you confident? How much really can the president do?
Not much, I'm afraid, because this crisis is a very serious one. The fact that the four countries led by Saudi Arabia have actually broken relations makes it very difficult for any formula to be put forward by almost anybody that will actually solve the crisis. Look at the fact that Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, spent I think most of a week there and failed to come up with a formula. And the other problem, of course, that Turkey faces is that it may be perceived to be on the side of Qatar in this crisis, which would undermine its ability to persuade Saudi Arabia. And it doesn't even have relations with Egypt and has very bad relations with the UAE. So, the fact that he went there is important, but his ability to actually deliver a solution, I think, is debatable.
Yeah, well, it's debatable, is it? Let's go to Mr. Al-Ahmed. To the Saudi king, is the Turkish president a convincing individual?
I don't think so. I second what Mr. Bulent said. In Jeddah, when Mr. Erdogan arrived, he was received by a local governor. When he went to Doha, he was received by the emir. The reception of Erdogan in Saudi Arabia was very cold and very cool, and he was visibly upset. And you can see from his facial expression that he didn't have a successful trip. It was a big sign. And if you see his expressions in Doha, they are the opposite. So it's very clearly from the beginning, even before his visit, the Saudi media, which is government controlled, has expressed doubt and accusation to Qatar. And in fact, about a month ago, the Saudi government issued a strong statement condemning the Turkish attempt to open bases in the Gulf. So they don't want Turkish role in the Gulf because there is a historical animosity between the Saudi regime and the Saudi monarchy with Turkey as a country, as a people. So this is not going to go anywhere. I can say, like Mr. Brown said, that Tillerson couldn't do it. Mr. Erdogan, I think, made a mistake by going and trying.
Okay, here's the interesting thing, Dr. Lee. First of all, President Erdogan and Turkey do not have good relationship with Saudi Arabia anyway, not to mention some of the other countries that haven't even established some very good ties at all. And secondly, you see Rex Tillerson even failed, at least for that last trip. So why is Turkish president so keen, at least on paper, in being a mediator between Qatar and Saudi, Egypt, Kuwait, and some of the other countries?
I personally believe Turkish President Erdogan's visit to the Gulf, and actually I believe he's not the mediator, and he's trying to visit Saudi Arabia in order to control the damage has been done because of this oil crisis. And because we know that Turkey is not neutral in this crisis. At the very beginning, Turkey has stood with Qatar against those the quartet of the four Arab countries. Right. And they even call these demands and oil for it is against the international norms, and also express the full support to the Qatar. But we know that before the crisis, the Turkey has quite good relations with the Saudi. Because of that, the relations has been worsening. So I think the main purpose of Erdogan's visit to the King Saudi is try to control the damage of this crisis.
Right. But the question is, Mr. Al-Ahmed, is that doable? I mean, what is this ultimate conflict of interest over here? Is it really between Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and some of the other countries? Or actually, you see a very different approach coming from Washington causing very big division now in that region? Or you see regional powers trying to make their points to the weaker parties in the region who is here to have a say?
I think there is an existence of polarization in the region within what's so-called the Sunni bloc. Qatar and its allies have their own project, and Saudi Arabia and its allies, they have their own. So that has preceded this crisis. Yes, the United States is cleverly basically enhancing this division because it's in the interest of the United States to have the Saudis on one side with their allies and the Qataris and their allies on the other side competing and trying to win American support. That's very beneficial for the Trump administration and the United States. You know, even though it helps others in the region, but that has been the American policy from the beginning. But there are deep divisions between the Saudis and their allies and the Qataris and their allies in the region, and that has been an established situation for decades now. So it's not going to change anytime soon. I don't think anybody will be able to bridge this gap in the near future.
The gap is inevitable, isn't it? I mean, Dr. Aliriza, you see the latest crisis in the Gulf region certainly demonstrate that. So whether President Erdogan is visiting or not, people are expecting that gap to be ever widening. And as a result of that, how much crisis management can countries in the region do, at least to avoid some military conflict, to name the worst?
We know Qatar has a border with Saudi Arabia, and on the other side it has the sea, the Gulf. So the moment that the Saudis actually cut off the land corridor, Qatar inevitably had to rely on outside support. And in this case, it's Turkey, to a great extent, with which it has an agreement on maintaining a base, and Iran, with which it has a good relationship, and actually they have a joint gas project. But the more Qatar relies on these two countries, the likelihood of the confrontation, the crisis getting worse, is higher. And one of the demands, let's not forget, that the four countries put in front of Qatar initially was the closing down of the Turkish base. So, you know, there is a potential for a military confrontation. There is a precedent for the Gulf countries to intervene in each other's territory. We saw that with Bahrain. It seems unlikely at the moment, but I think the potential for this crisis to get worse is higher than a resolution in the near future.
But you know, Dr. Aliriza and also Mr. Al-Ahmed, here is the fundamental issue. That is, what do the countries, when they make choices, what is the priority they are looking at? Are they looking at the regional issue, or are they looking at their global partnership? Let's go to Dr. Aliriza first. I mean, Turkey and Qatar, when they're making the choices, particularly Turkey, it is a member of the NATO. And it is trying to mend its fences also with the United States, even though it comes somewhat closer to Russia from time to time. So it seems there's a strategic decision or priorities Turkey has to make in order to have a final judgment about where to go, you know, on the issue of Qatar, vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Egypt, some of the others.
Very good question. And in fact, NATO is almost irrelevant in the equation because it focuses on Europe. But the relationship between Turkey and the United States is key to understanding what's going on in the region. What happened is that during the Obama years, when the Arab Spring began, Turkey and the United States were on the same wavelength. Qatar very much joined this project, if we can call it that. It helped undermine and eventually overthrow Gaddafi in Libya, and helped in the transition in Tunisia. And with the blessing of the United States, they cooperated in Syria. Now, Saudi Arabia took a dim view of the Arab Spring from the very beginning. And of course, in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood was overthrown by Sisi. So what we now have is the remnants of the US, Turkish, Qatar alliance with respect to the Middle East. The US is no longer supporting the project to change the Middle East. Turkey and Qatar are very much stuck with helping the Syrian opposition, from whom the Trump administration has withdrawn all support. And if anything, the Trump administration is backing, or at least Trump himself is backing Saudi Arabia in this crisis. So you cannot really understand the role Turkey is trying to play without reference to the regional and, in fact, the global role that Turkey's tried to play with the U.S., which is broken down.
Oh, same question. I have to go to Mr. Al-Ahmed as well. Saudi Arabia, when you look at the partnership
Yeah.
between Saudi Arabia and the United States as well. But then Saudis seem to also want to have a different voice from time to time. Not to mention, Saudis are reading the differences between the State Department, led by Secretary Tillerson, and the voices coming from the White House, led by, of course, the President Trump. So Saudi Arabia, decision-making priority, which is to look at?
I think the Saudis and most countries in the Middle East have prioritized regional positions better, more than their relationship with the United States. When it comes to Tillerson, for example, the Saudis have criticized Tillerson severely in the media because of his sort of cool approach, or warm approach with Qatar, and sort of almost adopting their position, and they still applaud Mr. Trump for his supportive position. But that's an American deliberate position to maintain hands with both sides of the conflict. But regionally, the Turks, for example, have been suffered great losses in Syria and with Russia and with the United States. Now they're trying to expand their influence, and it's an opportunity for the Turks in the Gulf. Not only they are going to have a base, they have a base in Qatar. Turkey is seen by the people in Qatar as a savior, as the only sure thing. The United States is no longer the dependent ally for the Qataris, even among the government, because the Trump administration's position. So there is an opportunity here. I think the number one result out of this crisis is that Turkey is expanding or returning to the Gulf, if you may, because it was once the dominant power in the Gulf. So I think that's the change we will see, which will enhance the division between the Gulf countries.
Here's the thing, gentlemen. I mean, we look at crisis one after another. Before all the side effects of the war in Iraq is being handled, we already see the crisis in Syria, and that's been going on for years, not to mention the kind of crisis it creates as a result of what's going on in Europe. And now we're looking at another crisis after all of these two divisions in the Gulf region ever more. So fundamentally, what are we looking at? Are we looking at Sunni-Shia division in the region, and that's boiling over all over the world? Are we looking at a specific struggle of who is the power when it comes to country or countries in the Gulf region? Are we looking at an overall general picture of the map in the Middle East for the very near future to change? I want to go to you, Dr. Aliriza, first before I go to the other two gentlemen. Dr. Aliriza.
Well, there is a Sunni-Shia divide, and we've seen Sunnis and Shias killing each other, both in Iraq and Syria. And on one side of the conflict has been Iran, the great Shia power, and on the other side have been the Sunni powers. In this case, we have a division within the Sunni world between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, both of whom were supportive of these Sunni Syrian opposition fighters. Now, the fact that Qatar has a relationship with Iran at a time when Trump is backing the emergence of a Sunni front to confront Iran, parallel to his desire to confront Iran, I think adds another dimension to the crisis atmosphere that you're referring to. So we have a local, or if you like, a regional crisis between the Sunni Arab powers in the Gulf. We have a Sunni-Shia divide, again, in the region, and then we have superimposed on that the United States, which is backing the Sunni powers led by Saudi Arabia in a possible confrontation with Iran.
Right. We only have 2 minutes left. I want to divide that to the other two gentlemen. Dr. Li, what is, do you think, the defining relationship for this crisis and also in the region?
I think, of course, there are some elements of sectarian between, Sunni and Shia. But I personally believe that, the fundamental reasons for the current situation is the politics. Some of the regional powers are competing to be a dominant power in the region.
As simple as that. And we are reading signs of it. Mr. Al-Ahmed?
Yes, I agree. I think with the issue of Shia Sunni is there, but it's not the main driver. Let us see what the Saudi, for example, have done with Qatar in the past nearly 2 months. They have had not only political criticism, but also basically issued fatwas against the people of Qatar and the government of Qatar, who are the same specific school, the Wahhabi school, yet they called them name, and the Qataris shot back at the religious leadership that is they followed for many decades. So really you are seeing how, for example, the Saudis and the Emirate overthrew an elected Sunni Arab leader in Egypt. So it's not really sectarian alone, it's mostly politics, but it's very important strategically to note that with the rise of the Gulf countries, sectarianism has grown by many leaps. Through Islamic histories, there have been Shia and Sunni divide, but not this great. But because of the central power of the Gulf countries, especially Saudi Arabia and Qatar, we have seen an increase in sectarianism.